working to connect a region of over 600 million bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles. You're watching ASEAN in Focus on today's headlines. President Bongbong Marcos Jr. in Singapore, and he thanked the Filipinos there for their overwhelming support during the last May 9 polls. He also praised the Filipinos for making a good impression on Singaporeans due to their skills and hard work. The Philippine government is continuously pushing for the grant of clemency to Mary Jane Veloso, the Filipina who has been on Indonesia's death row over drug-related charges. Press Secretary Trixie Cruz Angeles said the president has yet to release an official statement on the case, but assured that the processes are moving. A fire tore through a karaoke bar in southern Vietnam, killing 12 people and leaving 11 injured. The blaze engulfed the second and third floors of the building on Tuesday night. It trapped customers and staff members as dense smoke filled the staircase. And President Marcos Jr. and First Lady Liza Araneta Marcos have had purple orchids named after them during the second day of their trip to Singapore. Singapore Botanical Garden curator said the orchid naming shows the close diplomatic ties between the two countries, which will grow and propagate just like the orchid. First in our news, the Philippine Embassy in China has just reported that Filipinos in Sichuan are safe after a killer 6.8 magnitude earthquake jolted the area this week. Take a look. Now, citing records of the Philippine Embassy in Beijing, Chargé d'Affaires Dino Oblena said no Filipino resides in Ganzi, Ya'an City, the earthquake's epicenter. The embassy continues to monitor developments in Sichuan and is in contact with the Filipino community there to check if there are affected nationals. The government stands ready to assist any distressed Filipino, he added. Based on the latest data from the DFA, there are at least 167 Filipinos residing across Sichuan. As of September 6, authorities recorded 38 people dying in Ganzi, Tibetan Autonomous Prefecture, and 28 in Ya'an City following the tremor. 15 people, meanwhile, were missing, and over 250 had been injured. President Marcos Jr. thanked Filipinos in Singapore for their overwhelming support during the last May 9 national elections. President Marcos won the vote of Filipino workers in Singapore with over 36,000 votes, or 3 times more than his closest rival, former Vice President Leni Robredo. Let's listen in.
Dito sa halalan na ito, nabaliktad ang proseso. Nauna ang boto kaysa sa kampanya. Nahuli yung kampanya. Pero since kampanya ito, huwag niyo pong kalimutan, iboto po ninyo Bongbong at Sara. Ha? Dahil po sa inyo, kami po sa aming samahan na aming itinawag na Unity Team ay nagtamo ng landslide victory. Ito na ang unang pagkakataon sa kasaysayan ng politika sa Pilipinas na nagkaroon ng majority na Pangulo dahil sa inyo, dahil sa ating mga minamahal na kababayan sa Pilipinas. Lahat po, pati kami ay nagulat habang nagbibilang ng boto na umabot ng labis ng 31 million votes ang ibinigay ninyo sa amin. Nakita ko rin, noong nakaraang halalan, ang Singapore ay kayo ang isa sa pinakamataas na voting sa lahat ng iba't ibang lugar. Singapore had the highest, I think one of the highest, or the second highest voter turnout sa lahat ng overseas automated voting in the Asia Pacific. Third by percentage. Sa number na nabumoto, kayo ang pangatlo sa buong mundo, lit-lit ng Singapore. Pero pangatlo kayo. Yung performance ng eleksyon, ang pinakamataas na nakita ng embassy na recorded since overseas voting began in 2004. Muli, maraming salamat po.
Meanwhile, President Marcos also praised Filipinos for making a good impression on Singaporeans due to their skills and hard work. According to Migrant Secretary Toots Ople, the Philippines and Singapore will sign a joint communique to hire more health workers because Singapore recognized how hardworking the Filipino health workers are, especially during the time of the pandemic. Take a look.
Ang good news po, mismong gobyerno ng Singapore ang nag-reach out sa atin. Andito yung ambassador ng Singapore sa Pilipinas. At humihingi po sila ng karagdagan ng mga Filipino health workers dahil sobrang napabilib po sila ng ating mga manggagawa nung panahon ng pandemya. Kaya bukas po, isa sa mga lalagdaan ay isang joint communique with the Ministry of Health na nakasaad po doon ang kanilang paniniwala, ang kanilang kagustuhan na maka-hire pa po ng mga Filipino health workers natin. President.
Ganyang kataas ang tingin sa inyo ng inyong mga kasama na Singaporean dito sa Singapore. At nung tinanong ko, ano talaga naman ang magiging epekto nito? Ay naku, libo-libo ang hinahanap ng Singapore. Libo-libo, hindi lang nurse, kundi pati na yung mga aviation services, pati mga engineer, pati mga profesor, lahat na po. At siguro, hanggat na dumating ang araw na kompleto na ang trabaho sa Pilipinas, ay meron pa tayong pagkakataon na ipakita ang galing, ang husay, ang sipag, ang bait ng ating mga overseas workers. Kaya naman po, dadami ang mga kasamahan ninyo sa potluck. Kaya namin pinag-iibayo rin ang ating gobyerno ang paghatid sa inyo ng maayos, mabilis at pulidong serbisyo dito sa Singapore sa pamamagitan ng ating embahada. At dahil prioridad ng administrasyong ito ang kapakanan ng mga OFW at ang kanilang pamilya sa Pilipinas, ito yung pagbabago na dinala ng ating Secretary Toots Ople. Ay sabi niya, alagaan natin yung trabaho ninyo ay hindi nyo kailangan isipin ang kalagayan ng inyong mga mahal sa buhay.
There are an estimated 200,000 Filipinos living and working in Singapore. Of this figure, 58% of whom are registered as professionals and skilled workers, while 42% are employed as household service workers. In 2021, Singapore was the second largest source of overseas Filipino remittances worldwide, amounting to $2.20 billion. Now, during his meeting with the Filipino community in Singapore, President Marcos Jr. also said he plans to expand further the list of Singaporean investments in the country to help create more jobs.
My state visit to Singapore shall seek to fully maximize our trade and economic cooperation. Singapore was already our highest investor in 2021, and we have Singaporean companies with big ticket projects in the areas of telecommunications, infrastructure, startup and innovation, renewable energy, and healthcare. That's why our economic team, ito po ang humaharap sa inyo ngayon, ay makikipagkita sa mga possible na investor na maglalagay ng negosyo sa Pilipinas. Hindi lamang yon na patibayin ang trade ng Singapore at saka ng Pilipinas. We proactively attract investments in our country in order to accelerate post-pandemic growth and create more jobs in the Philippines. Dahil po sa ugali ng Pilipino na napapamahal ang ating mga kasamahan na kahit yung mga dayuhan na hindi tiga Pilipinas ay tayo ay gustong tulungan. Dahil alam niyo naman, ang Pilipino basta't nakilala ng mga lokal, ng mga kung saan nagtatrabaho ng OFW, ay napapamahal ka agad sa Pinoy. At hindi naman siguro kataka-taka dahil talaga naman yung Pinoy na iba. Ibang klase talaga ang Pinoy. Ibang klase, tingnan mo na lang ang ngiti ng bawat isa sa inyo.
Again, Marcos thanked the around 200,000 Filipinos who are currently in Singapore for their continued sacrifice in working abroad so they could send remittances to their loved ones, which help boost the local economy. President Marcos will bring home around $8.48 billion worth of business deals from his three-day visit to Indonesia, according to a palace official. Press Secretary Trixie Cruz Angeles said these agreements, which were secured during the Marcos' roundtable discussion with Indonesian business leaders and investors on Monday, would generate at least 7,000 new jobs. Of the amount, she said the Philippine government secured $7 billion in infrastructure for unsolicited private-public partnerships, or PPPs, such as C5 4-level elevated expressway. President Marcos's trip also yielded $822 million in investment in textiles, garments, renewable energy, satellite gateway, wire global technology, and agri-food, and $662 million in trade value for the supply of coal and fertilizer. In a press briefing in Jakarta, President Marcos told reporters that Indonesian business leaders and investors were very enthusiastic about starting businesses in the Philippines.
Very enthusiastic naman ng mga ministers ni President Widodo na yung mga prospects dito sa atin sa Pilipinas, and marami silang nakikita mga opportunities. So we will pursue that. And so I think I would describe the trip as more productive than we had expected. And in those meetings, meron mga napirmahan na umpisahan pa lang. I mean, you know, MOUs and LOIs are only the beginning to these things, but we are determined that it will not end there. Kuminsan kasi nagpipirmahan ng MOU tapos wala na nangyari. Pipilitin namin na hindi mangyari yung ganun. Sabi ko nga, doon sa mga napirmahan na LOI at saka MOU, pag natapos natin yung kalahati dyan, malaking bagay na yan. So that's something but the talk between myself and President Widodo proceeded so quickly. Umabot na kami doon sa organization ng mga task force at the technical level, which generally you don't get to in a state visit. Usually, pag-uusapan yan, yung mga ministerial level lang muna. O mag-uusap, our group will come and talk to you. Sabi niya, wag na tayong dumaan dyan. Let's go straight already, let's get something done.
President Marcos also said discussions concerning PPP agreements were the most extensive. Marcos's official visit to Indonesia took place from September 4 to 6. Aside from business agreements, his trip yielded pacts on defense cooperation, cultural cooperation, creative economy, and a plan of action for bilateral cooperation. He is currently in Singapore to boost the country's trade and investment relations with its Southeast Asian neighbor. The Philippine government is continuously pushing for the grant of clemency to Mary Jane Veloso, the Filipino worker who has been on Indonesia's death row over drug-related charges. Press Secretary Trixie Cruz Angeles maintained the need to be careful in releasing statements to avoid repercussions such as transgressing the sovereignty of another state. She also said the president has yet to release an official statement on Veloso's case but assured that processes are moving. Take a look.
Like we said, and we constantly say, when it is matters of international relations, the President will make a pronouncement only when the policy is already set in place and after recommendations made by the DFA. We're always very careful about any statements because they have repercussions later on. We also do not want to transgress the sovereignty of another state. So definitely the President will make no statement until we have some kind of further development on Ms. Veloso's case. But it doesn't mean na hindi siya inaasikaso. Tuloy-tuloy naman ang embassy natin sa kanya at sila nga po yung kumuha ng abogado para sa kanya.
So ma'am, all pronouncements regarding the development of the case will come from the DFA po?
Will be recommended by the DFA. If the President feels that the policy is in place and it is time to make a pronouncement, then of course he will do so. Pero for the moment, things are still moving. Since it was on September 4 only that our Foreign Affairs had brought the matter up to their local counterpart in Indonesia, then kumbaga, there's no decision yet that's made. In fact, the foreign minister said that isasangguni nila ito sa kanilang Ministry of Justice. So sa ngayon, there's nothing final, pero tinutuloy-tuloy pa rin natin yung paghahanap ng solusyon.
The mother of two was moments away from facing the firing squad in 2015 when she was granted a temporary reprieve after a woman suspected of recruiting her was arrested in the Philippines. Indonesia has some of the world's toughest anti-narcotics laws. Veloso's case attracted huge attention in the country and Indonesia, with rallies of support and boxing great Manny Pacquiao pleading for her life to be spared. Cruz Angeles said the Philippine Embassy's assistance to Veloso has been continuous and that she was in good condition at the Wonosari Women's Penitentiary in Yogyakarta. Indonesian President Joko Widodo stayed Veloso's execution in 2015 after then President of the Philippines Benigno Aquino asked that she be made a witness against a human trafficking ring that duped her into smuggling drugs. In other news, a fire tore through a karaoke bar in southern Vietnam, killing 12 and leaving 11 injured. The blaze engulfed the second and third floors of the building on Tuesday night, trapping customers and staff members as dense smoke filled the staircase. Many crowded onto a balcony to escape the flames, which grew quickly as they caught the wooden interior, and others were forced to jump from the building. Photos showed plumes of smoke billowing out of the bar located in a crowded residential neighborhood in Thuan An City, north of commercial hub Ho Chi Minh City, as firefighters on cranes tried to extinguish the fire. Witness Nguyen Sang, who lives near the karaoke bar, told the VN Express news site that when fire trucks arrived at the scene, a receptionist said there were 40 people stuck inside. The fire was Vietnam's deadliest since 2018, when 13 people died in a blaze in an apartment complex in Ho Chi Minh City. In 2016, a blaze in a karaoke bar in Hanoi left 13 people dead, prompting a countrywide assessment of fire prevention measures at bars and clubs. And last month, 3 firefighters died after trying to extinguish a fire at another karaoke bar in the capital city. Russian President Vladimir Putin has met with Myanmar junta chief Min Aung Hlaing for economic talks at the Eastern Economic Forum in the city of Vladivostok. Take a look. Min Aung Hlaing's visit comes as both governments are facing diplomatic isolation, Moscow for its February invasion of Ukraine, and for Naypyidaw, a military coup last year. Min Aung Hlaing is unlikely to be invited to the ASEAN Leaders Summit in Phnom Penh in November, with the bloc frustrated over a lack of progress on resolving the country's political crisis. Myanmar has been in chaos and its economy paralyzed as the military regime struggles to crush resistance. Russia, meanwhile, is under a variety of international sanctions after its February invasion of Ukraine. And since then, Myanmar's ruling generals have sought to deepen ties with major ally and arms supplier Moscow, whose invasion, the junta has said, was justified. During a trip to Naypyidaw in early August, Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, backed the junta's efforts to stabilize the country and hold a national poll next year. But U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken warned the international community to reject the junta's, quote, sham elections. The UN's atomic watchdog called for a security zone to be set up around Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as the area was hit by more shelling. Take a look.
I remain gravely concerned about the situation in and around the Zaporizhzhia plant, including reports of recent shelling. Let's tell it like it is. Any damage, whether intentional or not, to Europe's largest nuclear power plant in Zaporizhzhia or to any other nuclear facility in Ukraine could spell catastrophe, not only for the immediate vicinity, but for the region and beyond. All steps must be taken to avoid such a scenario. Common sense and cooperation must guide the way forward. The Zaporizhzhia facility and its surroundings must not be a target or a platform for military operations.
The physical attack, wittingly or unwittingly, the hits that this facility has received and that I could personally see and assess together with my experts is simply unacceptable. We are playing with fire, and something very, very catastrophic could take place. Inspectors of the IAEA have remained at the site. So at the moment, the IAEA and through it, the United Nations and the international community have the capacity to have a direct, immediate evaluation of the situation on the ground as may be the case, as it may happen. And this fact is unprecedented. We have the inspectors there already deployed. They are doing their work. We can agree on a very simple but incredibly necessary protective mechanism to avoid what is happening now as we speak, which is the shelling of a nuclear power plant. Let's seize this opportunity so fundamental for peace, for security, and to protect the populations of Ukraine and beyond.
Despite Russia's song and dance here today, to avoid acknowledging responsibility for its actions, Russia has no right to expose the world to unnecessary risk and the possibility of a nuclear catastrophe. Worse, this is a situation entirely of Russia's making. The current danger at Zaporizhzhia is a result of Russia's unprovoked and unlawful invasion of Ukraine. And specifically, it is a result of Russia's premeditated March 4th seizure of this plant.
The only way to ultimately remove the nuclear threats stemming from the illegal Russian presence at the plant is the withdrawal of the Russian weaponry and troops and the return of the station to the legitimate full control of Ukraine. This is a key prerequisite for restoring not only nuclear safety and security, but also respect to international law.
Важно, что, как мы услышали в ходе вашего брифинга в Вене 2 сентября, вы смогли своими глазами увидеть, что благодаря налаженному сотрудничеству между персоналом станции и российскими вооруженными силами, охраняющими станцию, она в целом функционирует в штатном режиме, и никаких внутренних угроз для ее безопасности нет. У вас была прекрасная возможность убедиться в том, что единственную угрозу создают обстрелы и диверсии со стороны вооруженных сил Украины.
Kiev and Moscow continue to trade blame for attacks on the Zaporizhia plant and on the city of Energodar, where it is situated. The IAEA sent a 14-person team to the site last week. At least 2 members were to remain on a permanent basis to ensure the facility's safety. But on Monday, the last working reactor was disconnected from the grid after shelling caused a fire. Located near the town of Energodar on the Dnipro River, the plant has 6 of Ukraine's 15 reactors capable of supplying 4 million homes. The 6 Soviet-designed units, which were all commissioned between 1984 and 95, have a total production capacity of nearly 6,000 megawatts, according to the operator. Before the war, the plant produced about a fifth of Ukraine's electricity. The country, which has large reserves of uranium, is the 7th largest producer of nuclear energy in the world, according to the IAEA. In other news, East Timor President Jose Ramos Horta met with Australian Foreign Minister Penny Wong and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in Canberra as part of a multi-day trip. While in Australia, Horta will also address the country's National Press Club with negotiations over lucrative gas resources in East Timor at the top of the agenda. Take a look.
Back home in Timor-Leste, I hate protocol. I don't like police escort, and I've been very impressed with the police cars in Darwin here.
All the lights flashing.
I thought, God, these Australians, I thought they were informal there.
We just want to look after you. We welcome you and your delegation, and so soon after we saw each other in Dili, I want to thank you and my colleague Minister Magno for the generous hospitality you showed me. I felt very welcome, and it was a wonderful visit.
Australia and East Timor currently share revenue from the Bayou Undan gas field in the Timor Sea that has been piped to Darwin since 2006. But that field is expected to run dry this year. Without further oil and gas revenue, East Timor's $19 billion sovereign wealth fund could be spent within a decade, according to Lau Hamutuk and East Timorese Research Institute. Ramos Horta suggested approaching new potential partners, including China, to finance an East Timor LNG plant. Ramos Horta has also suggested the Japanese, South Koreans, and Indonesians as potential partners. The news continues here on ASEAN in Focus. We'll be back. Welcome back. The death toll from Typhoon Hinnanmor rose to 10 in South Korea, according to authorities today, after the storm battered the southern coast with huge waves and heavy rain this week. Take a look. The typhoon, one of the most powerful to hit the country in decades, flooded streets and buildings as it passed through on Monday and Tuesday. In the southeastern port city of Pohang, one of the hardest hit areas, 7 bodies, 2 survivors were pulled out of the submerged underground parking lot of an apartment complex, according to the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures headquarters. The 9 were trapped after they went into the parking lot to move their cars during the heavy downpours, according to local media reports. Search and rescue operations continued today, and authorities said 2 people were still missing. Hinnanmor forced more than 4,700 people to flee their homes for safety, and it destroyed around 12,000 homes and buildings. Nearly 90,000 households lost power nationwide as the storm hit, but supply had been restored to most of them by Wednesday morning, according to authorities. Before the typhoon made landfall, South Korean authorities closed more than 600 schools schools nationwide as a precaution, and local airlines canceled some 250 domestic flights. And Hong Kong recorded its first case of monkeypox in a 30-year-old man who had traveled into the city and showed symptoms during hotel quarantine, according to health officials. The patient arrived in the city on Monday and was taken to hospital after he reported feeling unwell, according to health official Edwin Su. Now, visitors to Hong Kong must undergo 3 days of hotel quarantine as part of a zero-COVID strategy, which quashes outbreaks with travel curbs and lockdowns. Now, the monkeypox patient had no contact with the community and was classified as an imported case, Chui said, adding the risk of Hong Kongers getting infected was very low. No close contacts have been identified in the city. The patient spent most of the last month in the U.S. before staying in Canada for a week and then making his way to the Philippines and finally Hong Kong. He showed symptoms such as skin rashes, swollen lymph nodes, and a sore throat in the week leading up to his hospitalization, according to health officials. Officials also said Hong Kong will raise its alert level for monkeypox and notify the World Health Organization and mainland China. And finally, in our news, President Marcos Jr. and First Lady Liza Araneta Marcos have had purple orchids named after them during the second day of their trip to Singapore. Take a look. The pair got a first-hand look at the Dendrobium orchid when they visited Singapore's National Botanical Garden on Wednesday, the last day of their state visit, according to a press release from Malacanang. Dendrobium Ferdinand Luis Marcos was described as a robust and free-flowering orchid hybrid. It produces semi-arching inflorescences of 50 to 70 centimeters in length that bear 20 to 30 well-arranged flowers, with each flower measuring approximately 4 centimeters in width. The orchid's curled sepals have a wide background adorned with lavender striations, while its petals are white and flushed with bluish mauve. Marcos is the latest leader to be honored under the so-called orchid diplomacy, a tradition of naming a new orchid species grown in Singapore after a foreign leader or celebrity. Singapore Botanical Garden curator Wang Lei Kang said the orchid naming shows the close diplomatic ties between the two countries, which will grow and propagate just like the orchid. Thank you for joining us here on ASEAN in Focus. I'm Alma Angeles. As I always say, stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.